Good morning. Welcome to the dialogue on integrating sustainable landscape management into local planning processes, the online dialogue conducted by Slyke and Trust and ESCAMP in partnership. This event is organized as a part of the project Participatory NDCs for a Climate Just Response in a COVID-19 World, supported by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. In Sri Lanka, the project is implemented by Slyke and Trust, also Chrysalis as a partner. The partners for today's event, the ESCAMP project, Ecosystem Conservation and Management Project, as we know, implemented by the Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation for the with the financial support of the World Bank. This focuses on developing a comprehensive management framework for securing and sustaining ecosystem services, including the conservation of biodiversity, natural and cultural protected areas, and the enhancement of socioeconomic development. The project focuses on the development of landscape management plans as one of the primary outcomes, incorporating both ecosystems and economic dimensions, which relates to the areas through identification of existing livelihoods and mapping of natural resources to strengthen the adaptive capacities of vulnerable communities. The main organizing partner together with ESCAMP is Slyke and Trust. Slyke and Trust works on areas related to climate and disaster risk management, conservation of ecosystem and biodiversity, and the integration of Sri Lanka's climate-related commitments into local planning processes. Slyke and Trust aims to develop pilot ground-level activities to build on landscape management plans developed for the Hurulu, Kaudulu, Kantale areas representing the districts of Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa, and Trincomalee. So, in order to start today's proceedings, I would like to warmly welcome Mrs. Samanthi Ranasinghe, Additional Secretary Development, Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation, to conduct the opening remarks. Over to you, Madam.
Thank you, Damita. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's great pleasure to be with you today. First of all, I would like to convey my greetings on behalf of the Secretary to the Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation for the success of this seminar. And furthermore, I would like to thank to the organizers, Slyke and Trust Sri Lanka and the ESCAMP for inviting me. The theme of the seminar is really important for the country as we are moving forward with development agendas while the natural ecosystems such as forest, wetlands and mangroves are in critical stage. We, the Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation, as its name indicates, are responsible for the conservation and enhancement of the wildlife and the forest resource in Sri Lanka. Our plan is to increase the forest area from 29.2% to 30% by 2030. This includes an addition of another 50,000 hectares to the existing forest cover in Sri Lanka. The other challenge is we have to protect the present forest cover and maintain biodiversity at optimum level. Being a developing nation with higher population density, we have to manage our land efficiently and carefully. Our agriculture mostly depends on irrigated water discharged from national forest watersheds in high hill country. High percentage of annual electricity supply also generated from the hydropower, which is ultimately from the watersheds at the national forest. This is only two examples to understand the significance of the service of our natural ecosystem to the agriculture and the industrial sector. There are many more to be listed. However, today this valuable ecosystem are critical stage and the impact of ongoing climate change has worsened the situation. Therefore, utilization of land resource for various development purposes needs to be planned with due respect to the natural ecosystem. This has led to the landscape management planning concept all over the world, and I am pleased to see that the ESCAMP has taken the leadership in such planning in Sri Lanka, and I am also aware the Slycan Trust has joined with ESCAMP to take this initiative forward. This seminar is one of the outcomes of these initiatives. Finally, I would like to wish all the success of proceeding this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. Ms. Samanthi Ranasinghe, Additional Secretary, Development for the Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation. We would next move into our online panel discussion. Before starting the session, we would like to take a 3-minute quick break until all of our panelists are set and ready. And I would also like to warmly welcome all the participants who are joining online all over the world. A warm welcome to you as well. So in a 3 minutes time, we would start the panel discussion. Thank you. Welcome back again to our panel discussion. First, I would like to, while thanking to all the panelists who are present in person and also joining online, I would like to first take the opportunity to introduce our panelists. We have Ms. Samanthi Ranasinghe, Additional Secretary, Development, Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation. We have Mr. Anuru Saturusinghe, Project Director of ESCAMP, and also he is the former Conservator General of Forests. Then we have joining online Dr. Ranjit Punyawardana, Chairman of the National Steering Committee on Climate Change Adaptation and also an advisor to technical advisor to SLIC and Trust. We have also Professor Anoja Vikramasinghe joining online, Emeritus Professor of Geography, University of Peradeniya. Then we have Dr. Prasad Jayasuriya, Acting Deputy Director General, Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority. We have Dr. Tusita Sugatapala, Senior Lecturer, University of Moratuwa, former Director General of Sustainable Energy Authority and Technical Advisor at SLIC and Trust. We have Dr. Sampath Wahala, Chairman of the Governing Council, Sri Lanka Accreditation Board, and we have Ms. Vasita Vijayanayaka, Executive Director of SLIC and Trust. I welcome all of our panelists and thank you all for joining us in this discussion. To start off, I would like to first move to Mr. Anura Saturusinghe, the Project Director of ESCAMP. Mr. Saturusinghe, could you please explain how the ESCAMP focuses on landscape management and integrating the landscape management into national and local level planning processes?
Thank you, Damita. Good morning. Actually, the ESCAMP or the Ecosystem Conservation and Management Project was planned about 15 years ago. And at that time, I think even in our context, we were not talking about a thing called landscape management planning. And even now, this landscape management planning is something new to our country, especially for the environment and biodiversity sector. And our project development objective says is to manage selected ecosystems in Sri Lanka to ensure its conservation and benefits to the local community. So based on this, the component number 1 of this project is called pilot landscape management planning. When it comes to the pilot landscape management planning, actually, I mean, this is something new to us, even to the project and even to the two stakeholders or the departments as well as the ministry. And the first target or the challenge we had was to identify the correct procedure, correct approach for this planning purpose. And so it was really a sort of literature survey type thing, because there were none who were really qualified to tell us what this planning process was. So then, so that's why it took some time for us to commence this activity. And then after having number of consultations, discussions with various planning experts as well as the subject specialists. So finally we were able to draw a plan, and being a project which was focusing at environment, ecosystem conservation and management, first thing we have to do is to identify the objective, principal objective of this plan. So it was invariably the conservation. And then we thought of, I mean, it was sort of a survey. We requested both our partners, Forest Department and the Department of Wildlife Conservation, to identify suitable landscapes, or at least the protected areas that they think important for us to develop landscape management plans. And both departments came up with 2 different lists, and then we had priority ranking, and then we selected 2 landscapes, one for the dry zone and the other for the wet zone. So dry zone landscape represents Urulu, Kaudulla, Kantale protected areas, which runs through the districts Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa and Trincomalee. And red zone landscape we selected is Singharaja. Singharaja is just not Singharaja forest itself, Singharaja complex, which includes a number of natural forests in addition to the Singharaja Man and Biosphere Reserve or the World Heritage Site. So it is covers the districts in Ratnapura, Gaul, Matara and Kalutara. So then the next challenge we had was how to identify the landscape. Then there was a series of brainstorming sessions, and when it was decided to identify the areas, especially the lands outside the protected area, which has an impact on the existence of a particular selected landscape. So this is how we define the relevant landscape for management planning, and then we were able to identify number of divisional secretary divisions outside these landscapes, outside these protected areas. So those, so that was the second focus. And then thirdly, we had to look at the themes, like what are the relevant studies to be done and what are the relevant studies, information to be collected. Now, for example, invariably the biodiversity and impact on biodiversity is really important for us, because it really goes with our objective, the project planning objective. And then the secondly, the threats to the protected area, like human activities. When we talk about the human activities, it includes shifting cultivation, and then various other activities like timber mills or the sawmills, various types of positive and negative impacts to the selected landscape, selected protected area. So then likewise, then we were able to group this, as well as then we had to identify a team of experts who are capable of addressing these specific issues. And finally, of course, we were able to, with this, it was really a challenge, as well as it was a sort of a learning exercise for entire team as well. And then this team was led by an Indian expert who had wealth of experience in planning in various other countries in the Asian region. And then finally we were able to come up with a plan which is not 100%, we would say the 100% plan, the good plan, acceptable plan, but of course later on we were able to redefine it and redevelop it, and with all these lessons now we have started the development of the second plan. So these are the focusing areas, like the setting of an objective, and then identification of thematic areas, and then development of the mechanism or the approach, and then finally the development of the project. So I think this is the answer for your first question. And then to complete what you had asked, the integration, and then of course it was from the district level, national level, and then we had the district level with the committees which are chaired by the district secretaries or the government agents, and then we had divisional level meetings which were chaired by the divisional secretaries, as well as we were able to work with all the relevant stakeholders who really helped us in doing this exercise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sathurusinghe, for this elaborative explanation of the focus of the ESCAMP project, and also highlighting the specific thematic areas and multi-actor engagement. We would next move into one of the key areas that you highlighted, thematic areas, agriculture, one of the most important areas in Sri Lanka. So I would like to ask Dr. Ranjit Punyavardhana, National Chairman of the National Steering Committee on Climate Change Adaptation. Dr. Punyavardhana is joining online with us. So could you please share how your work related to agriculture and climate adaptation interlinks with landscape management and the related processes?
Thank you, Damita. Very good morning to all of you. And especially the Agriculture Department has a mandate to enact the Soil Conservation Act number 25 of 1951, which was amended in 1996 as number 24, where we basically concentrate, especially in the, as additional secretary very correctly mentioned, especially the Central Highlands, where the altitude is above 300 meters approximately. That is the Central Highland, from where all our rivers, most of our rivers originating and provide the water for the other part of the country, which is the lowland landscape. And in this act recently, with the guidance of the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, now we are focusing more on the new concept of sustainable land management. The sustainable land management ensures the good or appropriate management of the landscape. Then it will ensure win-win situation for all the stakeholders without any problem or any other repercussions. And therefore, I personally believe that in a world, even in Sri Lanka, when we are progressing with our development agendas, we should not work in isolation, especially when we are working on the landscape. We have to work together. We have to join hands in hand to work in the landscape if we want to have that landscape sustainable and give the its mandated services or ecosystem services to the people. Therefore, in a nutshell, if I mentioned about the what are our approaches in sustainable land management, which include the integration of sustainable landscape management, we emphasize on the prevention of land conversion and protection of vulnerable lands through the regulation of the act to the most extent possible, and also prevent and mitigate land degradation and restore the degraded soils through the afforestation process in collaboration with the provincial departments and the forest department, and also the control the soil erosion. And here we our main approach is the awareness creation. We have actually we can take the people into court and put it into jail, but we do not adapt that kind of approach, because most of the people, those who are violating this regulation of the Soil Conservation Act, are poor farmers. We can't take them to the court and give a fine. No, around 5,000 rupees fine is the maximum. I think our approach is, rather than getting them to the court and give a fine, we make them aware through the awareness program, through demonstrations, and through kind of giving subsidies, 50% subsidies for their costs through different projects. And so some of the projects are already in the field through the FAO, and in several years ago we had some projects with the Mahali and Forest Department as well also. And also with the sustainable land management, we ensure the improved soil water storage in the catchment to have a very good or improved base flow throughout the year in the rivers starting from the Central Highland. And also we ensure the management of soil organic carbon in the catchment areas, and also in the downstream, and also then enhance the overall soil fertility. I think if we integrate all these aspects into the national planning agenda, whatever the development process, definitely we all will be in a win-win situation without no regrets. I think That's my explanation for your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Punyavardhana, for that elaborative explanation on how agriculture and soil-related areas integrate with the landscape management. Next, we go to again one of our online panel members, someone with a lot of experience working with communities and grassroots level organizations, Professor Anoja Vikramasinghe, a Professor of Geography from University of Peradeniya. Professor Anoja, the question to you is also relating the work that you do, especially in terms of gender and community engagement. How does this interlink with the landscape management and the related planning processes?
Okay. First of all, let me say good morning to everybody. I'm joining. Extend my thanks to you and Slack and Trust. And today I have a very interesting topic to discuss with you. That is how gender and community management interlinks with landscape management. That is a quite complex subject area. However, I draw my attention based on one principle saying that gender and community are integral to landscape, where men and women as individuals, members of institutions, households and communities are engaged in managing the landscape. And it is important for us to see how gender and community interlinks with landscape management. And there are so many connections that we can take into consideration. First is that a landscape is occupational space for men and women. They work in such geographical space, maintain contacts regularly or occasionally, and contribute their inputs and generate benefits, materials and income benefits for their livelihood. So in that context, I would like to say that it is the human beings, men and women, who provide production asset, capital, enabling to manipulate a vegetation cover, revegetate in the surface, producing materials, generate income and employment. And they also manage a resource pool. It is a natural capital, water, forest and other soil and many others. And also they enhance the aesthetic values or psychological well-being by keeping a landscape in a sort of healthy form. In working out multiple economic opportunities, they invest their labor, time, knowledge and experience. Especially men are very concerned about manipulating the landscapes, enabling them to generate an income. On top of that, we can see that through all these links in the area of customary practices and custodianships, men and women have a responsibility and rise to engage in such activities and share the benefits. Now, from that perspective, I would like to explain how interlinks are maintained. And in this context, I would like to say that gender is a social variability reality found across all the landscapes, including forest, natural forest and man-made forest, ecosystems, and communities, where men and women as members of households and communities undertake their own responsibilities to make a living, to enhance the environmental quality and sustain the household livelihood systems. Now, gender interlinks are maintained through their household related tasks. We all know that as men and women have differential roles adhered to their life by the society, and they do different sets of or engage in different sets of activities in their own landscapes and managing the systems for sustainability. So interlinks are materialized through livelihood, economic and income generation, resource management, capital investments and distribution of many others. Similarly, it is featured by their intra-household roles. Intra-household roles include livelihood security and the food security, and also the nutrition security of their respective families and the communities. Links are directly influenced by the ideologies associated with what tasks are to be performed, where those tasks are to be performed, when and how, and what technological and services are available for these two sectors of our society, men and women. Gender links are materialized through decision making, management and resource allocation, including labor and capital allocations. So these connections can be seen throughout the systems, natural systems, semi-natural or man-made manipulated systems. These gender-specific configurations are connected with social ideology, indicating how they do, and the technologies, conservation technologies, and also sustainable utilization technologies of resources. And community management is a very specific area which can be seen in three context-specific systems. One is the resource-specific areas that are collectively used or shared by communities. Forest is a very good example. Although there are restrictions induced by the laws and legislations, people are involved and engaged in utilizing forest resources. And water is another area where farmer organizations are involved in managing the water supply and also canals. Irandamadu Irrigation Development Project in Kilinochchi is a very good example. The other thing is we can see that we have traditional systems such as yai systems where same track is used for paddy production by communities owning land in that area using rainwater, avoiding threats of pests and diseases. Resource-specific institution structures also there, particularly in relation to fishing. Ibankadua tank management program is a very good example. Second type of example I would like to place for discussing the community-based project-specific organizations which can be seen throughout the country. For example, home garden development groups in Gamunupura, community forestry groups in Sadin Navala, and canal groups allocating water in Mahaveli system areas, and also women's federations in Kilinochchi working on crop diversification in the highland areas are good example. Third type is the location-specific community engagement, which is connected with the rights to manage or claim the territorial inheritance. Adivasin is a good example. Similarly, we can see several examples in the dry zone areas where village tanks are managed by local communities. And I would like to draw attention to the planning process now. Planning process takes place at several levels, several sectors are involved, and gender inclusive planning process is central to successful and effective landscape management systems because they are the practitioners and the customers of these kind of things. So process should connected on gender inclusive policies, programs and projects and budgets. Second is gender assessment of institutional capacities should be a priority. Third, third one is the identification of opportunities and gaps and also constraints preventing full participation or engagement of men and women in a given context. Fourth is introducing gender inclusive targets and goals. We often go by the project's goals, we often set the project targets, but often we forget about the sort of community goals. Gender goals are equally important simply because equal opportunities are needed for women to involve in natural resource management and share the benefits and bear the responsibilities. And fifth one is introducing strategies and actions throughout the planning process, including gender indicators in monitoring and evaluation. And these are the things I would like to, idea that I would wish to share with you all today. Thank you very much for the opportunity again. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Anoja. Thank you very much. A very elaborative illustration and took a bit of time as well. But I think it was a very important highlighting like the aspect of the community integrating several aspects of landscape management and how the community should be empowered to manage the landscapes. I would like to get to Dr. Prasad Jayasuriya, the Deputy Director General of Sri Lanka Tourism. Tourism sector, as Mr. Sathuru Singh highlighted as well, is an important part in the landscape that the ESCAMP project has selected. Could you please share how the tourism sector's planning process takes into the consideration of the landscape management, especially focusing on ecotourism? Are there any specific activities mapped out for these specific areas that like the Hurulu, Kaudulu, Kantale region under the tourism plan?
Thank you very much, Damita, and on behalf of Sri Lanka Tourism, let me thank the organizers for inviting us to share our views on from the tourism perspective. So my discussion today will be purely based on tourism angle. So if you look at landscape management in terms of tourism, it's about managing a specially designated geological area. There are tourism activities in order to ensure biotic communities are maintained in proper functional order, and also to ensure that we support sustainable land use policies. Now it's very important to understand in terms of tourism, when we talk about land use policies, it's critical that we have a proper regulatory system to manage the use of land in order to ensure we get more favorable environmental as well as social outcomes, as well as we manage the resources more efficiently. Now here we need to look at your second area where we are talking about ecotourism. Ecotourism is a kind of tourism where we ensure a traveler visits an area where tourism functions are happening, and in doing so we contribute for the environmental conservation as well as we ensure the right benefits are flowing into the communities. Of course, when you're talking about ecotourism, an integral part of ecotourism is recycling as well as energy. The utility, water, energy conservations plays a major part. So coming back to tourism, why these things are critical today for tourism? As we all know, tourism is predicted to be the largest global industry during this century, and this was based on the phenomenal growth the industry experienced, especially after 1960s, during the last 60 years up to the COVID pandemic. And even today, when the whole entire tourism industry is at a halt due to the pandemic, still we in the tourism industry globally, still we believe that when we are going to the post-COVID era, the industry will quickly bounce back and follow that predicted graph to become the largest industry in the world. But the problem the tourism has created with this rapid growth is that it has already created issues to the environment as well as to the communities. And this is what we need to understand. There is nothing to hide about some of the fundamental truths about tourism. Tourism is an industry where a traveler or a tourist will compete with the local communities for the resources and of course use those resources. And there is a tendency in the tourism industry to overuse resources. Also, because of this, we create waste, at times there is pollution that is created from the tourism industry. So all this happened over the years when tourism was experiencing a rapid growth, and today, because of all these things, incorporating our topic, landscape management, land use policies and ecotourism in your tourism plan, I don't think it's an option anymore, it is a necessity. Anybody who is involved in tourism will have to consider this, because only by incorporating these three things, the landscape management, land use policies and ecotourism, the tourism can advocate our responsibility towards the environment as well as towards the society. So globally, as an industry, we have very well understood this reality, because by doing so, we can ensure environmental conservation. We can also ensure that we don't, or we avoid uncontrollable urbanization, the diminishing of the rural communities. We minimize the pollution associated with transport, and also we minimize transport costs. Also, we avoid land use conflicts. So all these things can be ensured by incorporating sustainability, ecotourism and landscape management into the tourism planning. So aligned to the global understandings, as the regulatory body in Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka Tourism also have understood this, and we have already initiated steps to incorporate this from 3 different fronts. Now, if you look at the tourism industry in Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority, as the regulatory body, we develop our own resorts under different themes. For example, if you look at the National Holiday Resort in Bentota, or the Pasikuda Beach Resort, or the Wild Resort in Yala, all are developed under different themes. And right now we have 3 more projects under development. Kucheveli in Trincomalee, we have another beach resort coming up. We have an island resort in Kalpitiya and a lake resort in Dedduwa. So all these resorts that are developed by SLTDA under different themes, we always develop a master plan with professionals, with experts, and with the involvement of the relevant stakeholders. We develop the master plan, and in that master plan we address all these 3 issues, and whatever development that is taking place will strictly follow the guidelines laid out in the master plan. So that is how we will ensure this is implemented in the resorts developed by SLTDA. Then, understanding that not necessarily tourism projects are taking place in our own resorts, and as we all know, it's taking place all over the country, we have not recently, about 2 years back, we have started working with Urban Development Authority in identifying special tourism zones and conducting zoning plans incorporating tourism, so that the same 3 concepts, ecotourism, landscape management and land use planning, is incorporated into an already functioning resort, functioning tourism area. It's tough. It's much difficult than doing it on an entirely new resort which is under development. But we are trying to work backwards to ensure that we address the issues that have already come up in the society. For example, people talk about areas like Alla and Arugambe, where there are issues, and we have to accept the fact that those areas were developed by the service providers themselves. But now it is high time, as the regulatory body, we get involved and try to minimize and take steps to address the issues that can come from tourism. And thirdly, there can be areas where they don't fall into any of these, not in the tourism resorts of SLTDA, not even in the identified tourism zones. So to support any investor who is coming up with a tourism project in areas that don't fall under any of these, SLTDA, Sri Lanka Tourism, has an investor relations unit, and as per the Tourism Act, any tourism related project needs to be routed through the investor relations unit of Sri Lanka Tourism. For example, if somebody walks into the BOI office, they cannot accept the application if it is tourism related. They need to send that to the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority. At least that's how the Act says. So at any point, they need to come back to SLTDA. So what we tell the investors is, at the initial stage, you come and work with us. We will guide you. We will partner you. We will appear on your behalf with all the relevant line agencies, whether it's Central Environmental Authority, whether it's Wildlife, Forest Department, CCD, BOI. We will work with all the relevant line agencies and look at your project collectively, do joint site inspections and work on getting you the approvals, but we will even look at changing and modifying your project or the proposal so that these concepts that we are talking are implemented. So at the end of the project, we all can be proud of that we have a project in place which has followed landscape management principles, land use policies, as well as eco-tourism concepts. So in short, a project that will positively contribute minimizing the damages on the environment and the society. So that is what we have addressed, and all these, understanding the importance and the sensitivity of the climate changes on the tourism industry, we have always in this master planning process address these requirements. Answering your question whether we have any project or plans in those 3 districts, I think if you talk about Trincomalee in Kuchaveli is about 32 kilometers to the north on the coastal line in Trincomalee district. There we have already developed the master plan in consultation with all the line agencies. But if you look at Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa, right now we don't have anything. But as I said, under that special zoning plan, in future probably we will work on identifying, because those are areas where tourism is actually happening. So probably we will look into those areas as well. I hope I answered all your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jayasurya. Next, I move into now, it gives you the picture of how complex the landscape management planning is, and different thematic areas getting engaged. So we need actually some sort of one area, one specific thing to combine all these things. Probably sustainable development goals might give us this opportunity. I would like to get to Dr. Sugathapala. Could you please share how activities related to sustainable development and related how it relates to landscape management and the planning processes?
Yeah, thank you, Damitha, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, I think already we have come up with or other heard from the previous speakers, multiple areas like forestry, agriculture, tourism, then of course land, the gender issues, and the importance of development, and also the import of the connectivity. And then we talk about the technology, then human resources, and so many things. So that indicate the topic we are discussing today. This the landscape management itself is a complex problem. So then it in a way come up with challenges, multiple challenges for the development. But at the same time, this connectivity also indicates the multiple entry points. So in that context, when you look at the broader picture, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, the 17 SDGs, place or come up with a solution framework, kind of a the foundation for us to think in a broader context to address this type of complex problem. So therefore, I consider this one as a complex problem, and I see SDGs or 2030 Agenda as a kind of a basic framework we have to follow. In fact, most of these the guiding principles have been elaborated by the previous speakers, but in order to put the things again, when you look at these SDGs, there are 17 SDGs, but one of the key principle is the interconnectivity and indivisibility. mean that these are interconnected. And when you look at these SDGs, it of course talk about the three dimensions of sustainable development, the environment, the society and economy. But in a much more broader context, when you look at the 17 SDGs, one way of interpreting SDGs, when you look at this 17 SDGs, we can place this one under what we call 4 Ps. We have 3 Ps where we talk about the planet, prosperity and people, meaning that these 3 dimensions of sustainability, but also it also contains 2 other Ps, which is the novelty or the importance of the SDGs beyond Millennium Development Goals 2. We talk about the peace and the partnership. Those elements have been indicated to the SDGs. So when you look at this planning, for example, and the key areas we are looking at, so this reinforcing effect of this additional 2P, in fact, give the answer to your question basically, that SDGs has captured the importance of having this, the integrity and then planning, and then of course the multi-stakeholder engagement, the importance of the institutions and so on. So that's one way of looking at it. So therefore already in SDGs, we have that basic fundamental approach where landscape management can look at it and then align their development plans, align with this key principle. The other way of interpreting it in these 17 goals, we call this wedding cake, arrangement, where we place the economy within society and the society within the environment. Meaning that all the sustainable development has to happen where the environment becomes the key element. So that is the economy within the society, society within the environment. So in that context, we see that when we look at the landscape management, we look at the environment aspect, but there we really go into not only the environment aspect, but the coexistence of the humanity or the society within the environment towards the development. So that's the integrated way of looking at it. So in that context, anything what we do in environment management, especially the today's topic, that is the landscape management, has to look into both economy and the society as an integral part. Already, I think Professor Anoja indicated the importance of this this aspect that emphasize the same the principle. So therefore, when you look at this guiding principle of SDGs, these are aligned with the topic of the planning and so on, because when you look at the SDGs going into the targets and indicators, it highlight critically the success depend upon especially the implementation of SDGs depend upon how far, how rational the planning is, how you integrate the for example the stakeholders, how you mobilize the stakeholders in this whole process. So therefore usually we talk of the planning at a higher level or national level, but in SDGs it go into the subnational or local level where the planning has to be done with the full engagement of the stakeholders, mobilize them towards planning. So therefore, in brief, I would say even for the landscape management, we can follow these fundamental principles of SDGs, where all these the guiding frameworks are basically available now. So we can go with that. So with that, I will conclude my brief presentation. I think probably in the question time we can discuss more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sugatapala. Going in the same lines, I would get to Dr. Wahala, Sampath Wahala, the chairman of the Sri Lanka Accreditation Board. How does your work, especially accreditation now, Dr. Jayasuri was talking about tourism, then Dr. Punyavardhan was talking about agriculture, where standardization and this quality assurance becomes a very critical role. We come to about forest accreditation as well. So how does your work in especially related to accreditation, standardization interlinks with this landscape management and the related processes?
Okay, thank you very much. Very good morning to you all. So to answer that question, I will take a few minutes to give some kind of overview about what is this accreditation and accreditation board is very quickly, because so as accreditation board, so we have established under Act number 32 of 2005. So with the mandate of giving conformity accreditation for the conformity assessment. There are two terminologies: accreditation for conformity assessment. With that, actually, if you look at the Sri Lanka's quality policy, so accreditation board plays as an apex body in this quality infrastructure in the country. So what basically we do, we cover so all the aspects. So we as accreditation board, we make sure to give quality service, product, or whatever to at the end to the human, looking after the human well-being, and also the quality of environment, and also looking at the economic aspect in the country. So that is basically we are working on. So just to get some idea about the accreditation board and our role, so at the moment we are working giving accreditation for conformity assessment according to the internationally recognized standards, covering from medical laboratories, which gives the quality service for those who are looking for test reports from medical laboratories. We have accredited so many medical laboratories, which make sure if you take the test report from accredited laboratory, you can guarantee that okay, fine, this certification has transparent and gone through very good process to make sure the report is in line with internationally recognized standard. So and also we are working with actually we have accredited testing and calibration laboratories. So I will give the link with connection with the landscape management and other infrastructure development of these accreditation areas later on. So the testing and calibration also. So if you take some kind of a testing, if you look at any kind of a product that we are consuming, so be it gone through some kind of a testing, right? There are some international standards on some of the products. So we make sure the laboratory that they do testing in the different areas, these laboratories have competence, and also they do in a partial way, and also it's the transparency and the efficiency of delivery of that testing. So that is another area. And also we accredited some of the inspection bodies. We know that the inspection is everywhere, so we need to inspect some of the operations, processes, and even the product operations in different contexts. So we do accreditation for some of the inspection bodies, those who do some of the inspection. And also we cover the certification. We are more familiar with the certification, management system certification, and other different systems certifications. Certifications are offered by different certification bodies. We make sure these certification bodies have the competence to issue those certificates, and they are impartial, and they are efficiently and transparent manner issuing that. So we make sure by the accreditation on that aspect as well. And also the good laboratory practices, that's another area. So the laboratory testing in generally, so we produce a lot of information, lot of data. So we support laboratories to if they setting up some of the system according to good laboratory practices, so we can assure that these laboratories are putting out more credible and reliable data, the findings from those laboratories. And also looking at the environment aspect, so we have accredited few conformity assessment bodies on greenhouse gas management related issuing of greenhouse management related certificates. So, if you look at the area, that at the moment we are working with the 10 different areas to give accreditation. So, basically, if you come to the standardization, now, so accreditation is at the end. So, you have standards. We are, as accreditation board, we are working with International Accreditation Forum, and we are partnering with the International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation, and we are partnering with the Asia Pacific Accreditation Corporation. So these are the global networks. So we are working with to give the international recognized the credibility to whatever the service that provided by different conformity assessment bodies. So what I have mentioned, all are we consider it as conformity assessment bodies. To which they conform is the standard produced by the different people. So we can have a different standards. Sri Lanka, we have Sri Lanka Standard Institution. There is a National Standard Development Authority. They adapt some of the international standards, and they the different assessment conformity assessment bodies, they use these standards in conformance with that standards. We as accreditation body, we confirm that these implementation, these standards through the conformity assessment bodies are in line with some of the internationally recognized norms. So that is how it works. So just to give some idea about the context that we are talking here, the landscape management is, yes, so we know that this is land is a limited resource. We all know that we manage by the humans, and the human and in nature interaction is there with the landscape management. So, and also very clearly Dr. Tusita mentioned that the importance and the link of this is a global agenda, global sustainable development goals, or the 17th sustainable development goal is a global agenda to achieve, so the make the balance of the development, economy, the people's well-being and everything. So that if you look at the as accreditation board, we are working with international standard organization. Actually, at the end, we confirm that the implementation of international standards in a different context by looking at the way of implementing those. So therefore, we have some responsibility on dealing with the internationally recognized international standards. I have just give you a few numbers because ISO, that's non-profit organization, they have actually engaging with 168 countries, and once they develop some of the standards, so they consider all the concurrence from different nations to put up with some kind of a standard out. So so they have mapped these standards. I will just take a few minutes to give some of the numbers, then you can have understand some kind of understanding how we can use these standards in implementing the very good standardized to follow some of the standardized approach to utilize these lands and other resources. All the if you look at the biosphere, the land and the atmosphere and all the other component in the earth, so connect with these SDGs, and there are a lot of standards are developed to make sure these components are running in standardized way that enhance the quality of so whatever the components in this context are in line with globally accepted way. So if you look at this, there are simple mapping of SDGs and the ISO standards. So we can see that starting with the poverty, there are about 336 standards being developed. So address the poverty, and also if you look at the zero hunger, there are about 505 standards addressing zero hunger, and about so if you look at the good health and well-being, so there are about 2,700 standards. So at the quality education, 550 standards, and gender. So as the previous speaker also mentioned about the gender equality and those type of thing, to address those component, it's about 170 standard, and clean water 400, and affordable clean energy related standard. There are about 700 standards on clean energy, and decent works, looking at the people's work, about 2000. And also if you look at the highest number of standards are in industry, innovation and the infrastructure. So there are about 12,000 standard on that aspect. And if you look at the 10th SDGs, reduce inequalities, there are about 400 standards, and so which is somewhat directly linked with, to my understanding, the sustainable cities and communities. If you look at the landscape management, there are about 2,200 standards, ISO standards, internationally recognized ISO standards on that area. And also responsible consumption and production, there are about 2,000 standards. And also climate action related, more than 1,000 standards. Life below water, there are about 200 standards. Life on land, there are about closer to 1,000 standards. Likewise, even with the peace, to address the peace related issues in the human context, there are about 133 standards. So I have just given these numbers. So these standards been developed by engaging a lot of expertise, putting up a lot of man hours. These are some kind of a framework to run with. So and as accreditation board, so if you look at these standards, if we can at least utilize some of the standards, because we know that very few standards are being implemented. However, I have to mention that most of these standards are voluntary basis. So if the regulatory authorities can utilize the already developed some of the framework to implement some of the areas, that would be great, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel, some of the areas, because already developed and recognized, well recognized. So that's why at the moment, as accreditation board, we are working with the connecting different regulatory authorities to give understanding on the importance of these standards. Then they can think of regulate, or at least to utilize some of the framework to do some of the implementation on the ground. So I will stop in this point. We can have a more discussion during the discussion point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wahal. I think it provides a good platform for the next questions later on as well. Now I would like to get to Vasita Vijayanayaka, Executive Director of SLIC and Trust. So many areas and things were covered in this discussion. Important fact is how all these things needs to get integrated, and also we would like to know SLIC and Trust, how does this whole landscape management works with the relates with the work that SLIC and Trust is doing, specifically looking at enhancing the resilience of communities and the ecosystems.
Thank you, Damitha, and thank you to all the speakers. It was very interesting to hear some of the aspects that were told, because I haven't heard of some of them also. So I'm thinking how these can be integrated into the work that we do as well. So just to give an overview of what we do policy analysis and research work as a think tank, and also we make sure that the work that we do as research would be evidence-based, and the policy interventions as well. So how our work relates to landscape management would be through these pilots and the research work that we do, and also capacity building and outreach work related to communities, as well as at national and local level. So in terms of the themes that were mentioned and how we are discussing, so one would be the conservation and biodiversity work that we are doing, the ecosystem management work. So we already have an engagement with the ESCAMP on how we could pilot some work at the local level, building on the land use maps that they have developed. So we will be working on these and integrating some of the elements that we discussed, for example, how the communities can be engaged, how SDGs could be integrated into the planning processes, and how climate risk management could be also integrated. So which would then be about vulnerability mappings and risk management that comes into the planning processes at local level, because there's climate action work that we do, and then how can these be brought into local level planning, because there's an understanding that climate commitments are at national level, but in order to do the climate commitments at national level, it needs to go to the ground level. So local level planning, how this can be integrated, would be something we're looking at as well. And also agriculture sector, Dr. Punyavardhan also mentioned a lot on this. So our work would be focusing on how communities, the agriculture communities, the farmers are resilient. This focuses on how risk management, risk transfer happens. So, for example, social protection schemes, as well as identification of droughts, floods, that sort of climate and disaster risk, how these impact communities, and then also human-animal conflicts, how that can be addressed in a humane way and with the community and participatory inclusive mechanisms integrated. Then also youth engagement and stakeholder engagement, that's something we work on. Youth focus is something we prioritize as well. And how in the communities that we focus on, or the landscape management that happens, the areas of ecosystem conservation, risk management, sustainable development, how youth could be part of this as the driving force is something we focus on as well. Also tourism, which was mentioned. So we do ecosystem conservation focusing on mangroves. So Trincomalee is one of the areas that we work in, not on conservation, but in general. And also in Kalpitia, we have a site. So it's interesting that some of the sites you've mentioned are already areas that we're working in, and how this could build into entrepreneurship scaling up, as well as ecotourism being scaled up, and also capacity build. So we have some activities where we are looking at how we can provide capacity building and modules that are developed. COVID has kind of, well, I wouldn't say stop, but kind of delayed some of these activities because we can't work with communities at the moment. But the expectation is that we would be able to implement these activities soon, or at least integrate them into education processes related to tourism and hospitality, so that it'll have a longer impact than just a one-off engagement. So we work with Marine Environment Protection Authority in some of these activities. We also have an engagement with SLAB, which we recently established, and we hope to have activities with ESCAMP going forward as well. We've been in discussion for a while, but again, COVID on the ground has been the problem. So we're looking at how our work could contribute to development processes which are sustainable, rather, and also looking at the national priorities, so that we are not doing one-off interventions, but feed into the mechanisms that are identified as priorities for the country. We've already had some engagement with the Tourist Board, or Sri Lanka Tourism, on how these could be integrated and brought forward. Yeah, so I will stop at that, and then maybe I can talk about the other activities next round. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Wasita. So, very interesting first round of how each of these sectors, thematic areas link with landscape management, and we could see a very strong integration and strong interlinks with all the sectors. Going into the second round, I would like to request all the panelists, like we have a shorter time frame for the second round, so your responses might have to be a bit shorter. I would start with Ms. Samanthi Ranasinghe, the Additional Secretary from Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation. What steps are taken to enhance the integrated landscape management, and how would the Ministry of Wildlife look into addressing these needs and landscape management going forward? Sorry? Right. Yeah. So basically, like then I would direct the same question to Mr. Sathur Singh as well. Probably, like how this overall, like what steps would you consider as needed to be taken, enhance the how would ESCAMP look into addressing these future activities of ESCAMP?
Yeah, thank you, Damita. Like I mentioned earlier, now this is a new exercise and new activity, and for us as a project as well as the ministry, the most important thing is for us is to see how to institutionalize is to the national level as well as go up to the regional and grassroots GN level. So this is the real challenge which is ahead of us. As all the other speakers mentioned, now this is really a complicated process. Now there are so many stakeholders. So actually at the moment we are learning, this is sort of a learning exercise, but we are planning to work with the Sustainable Development Secretariat as well as UDA. At the top level with the Finance Ministry, and to explore the ways and means how to institutionalize this planning into the National Planning Department, and how to find the ways and means of the government accepting this process. So the initial step would be a cabinet paper which will be drafted and submit to the cabinet through our ministry. And just to continue from there, then at the grassroots level, at the moment we are working with the selected divisional secretariat divisions to as another way of institutionalizing this, because even we found it a very positive response at the district divisional level as well as the GN level, that they found that most of their work, most of their responsibilities are being now in a sort of an integrated form, because the project pioneered, discussed with all the stakeholders at the divisional secretariat level, and project helped the divisional secretary to develop sort of an integrated plan for the entire divisional secretariat division, focusing on the relevant activities like the agriculture, other projects as well as the relevant activities. So this is another plus point for us, and also now we are trying to win their confidence at divisional level. Then of course we are planning, and the activities are happening at the grassroots level too, and which means at grassroots level we are working with the local communities and GNs, Gram Niladaris and Gram Niladari divisions, and also the working with SLICAN is another example and another experience, because we are trying to work with various other stakeholders. It's not limited to the government sector. We are trying to work with the private sector as well as CBOs, different community-based organizations, as well as the NGOs and various other partners who are really interested in working with us. Because and also, as the gentleman, the additional DG of the tourism mentioned, I think we have advertised looking at an expert, tourism expert, to develop a tourism development plan for the entire HKK landscape. Unfortunately, so far we haven't get any applicants, but I'm sure I can talk with him and see what are the possibilities for us to, because now what the plan there is to develop a sustainable tourism plan for the entire HKK, which includes the elephant parks like Hurulu, Giritale and Kaudulla, plus religious areas like Somavati, Anuradhapura, and even areas, and plus various other tourist attractions. So this is also, we have another like 12 months time for the project, so we are trying to develop a sort of integrated tourism plan, sustainable tourism plan for this entire HKK landscape. To continue with that, the other most important thing I think we need is the better communication, and to have a communication strategy. I mean, our experience is, if we are to develop another plan for this type of landscape, what is really needed is the proper stakeholder analysis, and to have a communication strategy from the planning process until the implementation stages, because this is really needed to address different stakeholders. You need different strategies, communication strategies, and this is really important. So this is another lesson we learned, and which is really even for the institutionalization, we need to inputs from good communication people to take this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Satru Singh, and also the Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation, to explaining us like what the next steps would be on the ESCAMP project. I would like to get to Dr. Punyavardhana, Ranjit Punyavardhana, again on next steps. What would you consider as needed to be done, like to enhance integration of landscape management, especially focusing on the agriculture sector and also the livelihoods, mainly because agriculture sector competes, you know, with the natural resource and the need of providing livelihoods for the people. So what are your ideas on that, Dr. Punyavardhana?
Punyavardhana, can you hear me?
I think sorry. I think it's a difficult question to answer them because you know that out in Sri Lanka, the rural sector occupies around 88% since 1960, and now in the rural sector, 70% of them are their main livelihood is the agriculture. So most of them are not very concerned about, some of them are okay, but most of them are not very concerned about the landscape management, especially with respect to the soil conservation and land degradation. Therefore, we should, and again, it has been further confounded by the climate change, as we all know. Therefore, these two things we have to address simultaneously in future: climate change and the land degradation and the mindset of the rural community. And we have to make them aware to protect the soil and maybe an advantage of the soil, and without which we may not be sustainable, especially the agriculture. The one good move is in the recent development of this application of organic manure for the agriculture sector. That will have multi-dimensional impacts about the sustainable land management, especially the landscape management, upstream and downstream both. And what I believe is Damita, even we should not consider agriculture sector alone when we think about the landscape management. We have, as I said at the first session also, we I think Mr. Hathur Singh very correct to mention that there are a lot of actors or role players. So these role players have to work hand in hand if you want to ensure the sustainable landscape management. And also, I want to highlight that if we have that kind of sustainable, integrated land management system in this country, as Professor Gupta mentioned, we will be able to achieve the sustainable development goal, and also will be able to realize all three environmental concern convention of the UN, like UNFCCC, convention on desertification and land degradation, and convention of biodiversity. I think these, if we, I'm repeating, if we act as a team by joining all players in the landscape, then we'll be able to protect the landscape as a sustainable resource.
Thank you very much, Dr. Punyavardhana, like highlighting the importance of how people, like different entities and actors, should go hand in hand. Now I would like to get to Professor Anoja Vikramasinghe. Again, even in your previous explanation, you highlighted the importance of how important it is, you know, different actors, and also especially, you know, both men and women, how they need to get engaged. Communities have different roles. So how would you consider what needed to enhance in gender responsive actions, participatory aspects? Especially you mentioned that different communities given the right to manage their resources, that sort of thing you mentioned. So if you could elaborate a bit more on that very quickly.
Thank you, Damita. And it's again is a very sensitive area, and I would like to perhaps present what steps should be taken to enhance gender responsibility in landscape management. So In this context, I wish to mention several procedural steps. I think a lot of difficulties have been discussed, but at the same time, there are scattered evidences like home garden landscapes, non-forest landscapes are managed and maintained by people. And a lot of conservation measures are there in a scattered manner. But what are the steps that we could be taken? One is the direct engagement of men and women and communities actively, enabling them to express views, limitations, and constraints, draw plans for their own terrains that can be managed with their inputs. Here again, gender analysis should be used as a tool enabling men and women to engage during the process right from the starting point. And this also requires quite a lot of ground preparations, like capacity building of the local communities. They also are in need of awareness of the processes that we talk here, landscape management and also climate change adaptation, mitigation, and how to replicate the examples that they have in their hands. And the second step should be a proper understanding. Now here, who need the understanding? For example, we have to have a proper understanding of the local context and gender specificities at all levels. Often plans are driven by gender ideologies without exploring the importance of having both sectors, men and women, enroll as responsible and experienced people in landscape management. Now, this responsibility sharing is extremely important rather than going by gender ideologies, differentiating women's roles and men's roles on the basis of reproduction and production, their home-based work and outside production-related work. So in that case, we have to have, as a second step, we have to have a proper understanding of local context, and also local people are in need of understanding of the transitions expected by the state agencies or the divisional secretaries by implementing STDs and also the climate change mitigation actions. And third point is the step is the collection of gender disaggregated data or information reflecting the roles and responsibilities of men and women in every local context. If we are sort of working in a coastal area, we have to have gender disaggregated data in addition to the information that we collect on biophysical and agroecological conditions or the disaster prone areas, referring to the biophysical and scientific information. So in that sense, I feel that we have to have gender disaggregated data reflecting or highlighting production and conservation domains in which men and women are working and contributing, and their priorities and concerns over the degradations and deforestation in particular, and also the availability, what are the resources or assets that are available at their disposal. And fourth one is a very sensitive area, that is the policies. Policies with national, regional and local levels committed to gender responsive development. Often when we talk about this gender responsive development, people like to point out the Ministry of Women's Affairs. It is beyond the boundaries of women's affairs. When we talk about the lands, it is a source of living for men and women in rural areas. As Dr. Punyavardhana has mentioned, in rural areas, it is a livelihood source which should be maintained by engaging them as actors and activators. And process should be, and I would like to sort of mention few things about the process, should be a participatory process and a bottom-up process, which are really, the jargon that we can see in the international literature. First, identify and recognize gender roles, knowledge, experience, and practices related to all the domains: production, utilization, conservation, and restoration. And engage men and women and the communities to identify sensitive areas, fragile areas, and work out windows of opportunities that need to be worked out through their engagement. And this also need gender sensitive approaches, strategies, frameworks, and programs. And also, in most cases, we don't have budgetary allocations to work on these gender inclusive frameworks. Third one is the establish goals and targets integrating gender specific needs, priorities, and social assets into action. Often we don't have gender specific goals and targets, which are really important simply because if you look at the global ranking systems here, within our country has reversed its status from below Bangladesh and India. Why? Because women's earned income share is very low and their participation in decision making is low. Due to these two reasons, we have been sort of pushed downward on the ladder. So these are the things we have to take into consideration. And also implement projects, programs, engaging men and women as custodians, not as participants, listeners, but they should be the responsible citizens that who could take in charge of these interventions. And I wish to sort of propose another process, element to the process, that is gender mapping. Mapping is done using GIS in most cases, but same technology can be applied for gender mapping, indicating the areas with sensitive areas or options. Then introduce gender responsive frameworks, enhancing equal opportunities for men and women, and also integrate gender indicators for monitoring and evaluation, reflecting the impacts of gender responsive transformative actions that we can introduce in the management of landscape. Finally, I wish to say that in this process, there must be space for us to revisit actions and see the gaps, limitation in the procedures and indicate the achievements and disseminate such information to the global communities that we achieve through landscape management where gender sensitivity is ensured. I think these are the things that I present to you based on my experiences and knowledge, but outside your project areas. Thank you for your attention again.
Thank you very much, Professor Anuj. A very elaborative explanation again how gender action, responsive action could be integrated into landscape management. Next, I would like to get to Dr. Prasad Jayasuriya. That's the final question. What do you think? What steps do you think consider needed to be enhance the integrated landscape management into tourism? How can we integrate activities of tourism into local level planning processes?
Thank you, Damita, for that question. I think when you're talking about landscape management, again from tourism point of view and also looking at it from sustainable development point of view, I think it is a decision, especially if you look at tourism, that needs the involvement of highest level decision makers, especially looking at it as a area that needs technical and administrative inputs. So it's very important that you work around and agree with organizations, agencies that are responsible for political, environmental, social, technical, economic and even legal criteria which are related to the landscape development and management, especially when it's related to tourism, because I'm trying to be a little more practical, because over the years in Sri Lanka we have seen as a country we have lost a lot of opportunities in tourism because we have a very lengthy approval process. So taking that into consideration and looking at how best sustainable or landscape management can be addressed, I think that is the need of the hour, because as an industry, we believe the post-COVID era, more travelers will be looking for destinations that offer experience closer to the environment, experiences that will not harm the environment. So in that context, I think probably we may have to live with the pandemic for some more time, and before the tourism really comes back to the normal. I mean, we are already functioning, but I don't think we will see the large numbers. And also, it may be not a reality for us to look at the same numbers, but now we need to understand it will be a more volume-based business. So in that context, it's very important that we look at this process and do all the homework so that we have a destination ready to welcome the tourists who are looking for that unique experience. And I think as a country, we have got all the right ingredients, a lot of diversity. We have everything other than snow in this country, right? So we have got everything, but we are still relying on the same old marketing concepts, but the world has moved totally in a different direction. So in that context, to answer your question, I think we need to look at few important steps. For me, the first and most important step is to look at immediately forming a multi-agency committee, especially to look at the tourism industry, that the agencies that I have stated already, the areas that they can cover, and we need to work together in identifying key tourism zones in this country, along with what should be our goals and objectives in terms of landscape management. Once you do that, I think we all understand we may have X number of zones, but we will not be able to implement them immediately. So we may have to prioritize them so we become more practical. Once you do that, the next important step is, with inputs from all these line agencies, we work on developing the concepts and the procedures that we need to follow in each of these identified zones, and get the approvals from all the relevant line agencies for those agreed procedures. Then I think the fourth important step is, as the regulatory body, transfer the ownership and authority for us to implement those agreed terms and conditions in terms of landscape management for those agreed zones, with minimum approval times from the relevant line agencies. I am very honestly saying this because in the past we have lost a lot of opportunities to other countries in the region, because people don't want to hold on to their money and wait for the approvals. And the fifth important thing, to answer your question about how we take it to the low level, I think it's very important that parallelly we conduct awareness sessions, training sessions for regional level, local level people to communicate this message, so that the knowledge and the implementation becomes very much easier for the people when we are working on the ground. And the sixth important step, or maybe not a step, but important need is, all these steps should be implemented by policymakers who work very closely with professionals or experts who cover various areas that are related to the landscape management, be it landscape architects or planners, engineers, whatever you may call it, university professors. We may have to get all the experts to work around and get the process moving, because I think for us, yes, it's important to get the environmental and social concepts addressed through landscape management into tourism planning process, but it is equally important that we have a process, not a document. Still takes ages to get the approvals. It's a document which can be implemented with minimum time, so that there are investors. I mean, if you look at tourism is down, but if you look at tourism investments, we have done better than 2018, 2019 was better than 2018, 2020 was better than 2019 in terms of investments. So there are enough people who wants to invest, assuming that tourism is an industry, as I said, will still take off quickly in 2 years. So they want to be ready at that time. But again, if they see that they can't get the approvals in 2 years, they may probably move into another country. And I think Ms. Samanthi very well know that last week, coincidentally, we were looking at a different project, because tourism is not necessarily about putting up a hotel. It can be different adventure activities. So all these things will have to be in line with the responsibilities of tourism towards the environment and the society. So that is why we need to have a very clear plan which can be implemented with minimum time frame. So I think if we do that, we can really make Sri Lanka count, and tourism counts for the economic contribution in this country. And there is a lot of scope in future, although tourism is down right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jayasuriya. With that, I would like to get to Dr. Tusita Sugatapala. Again, implementing SDGs, what needs to be done, like, what needed to be enhanced integration of SDGs into landscape management, especially at local level. I would also like to mention something what Dr. Jayasuri also mentioned. Rather than SDGs being a ticking box process, how could it be, be a practically implemented thing? Hello.
Thank you. Yes, I think in fact previous speakers in the second round already indicated the key elements, but I will just elaborate on that. And we look at this 2030 agenda and the 17 SDGs. These came as a global framework convention, but implementation of these is a responsibility with the national government, local governments, and other stakeholders, even private sector. So therefore, it's a mandatory, or it's a fundamental that those SDGs, their targets and indicators are localized. We call domestication. That by considering the local circumstances and priorities, that has to be done. In fact, it's happening now, but I don't see it's happening in a way we require, because now already 5 years has gone. Still we are trying to localize, it's happening. But in that context, the basic principle is that these concepts are well applicable, not only national level, but local authority level, like local government level, provincial and local authorities, and beyond that, like any stakeholders, their engagement, the projects, programs can be aligned with SDGs. Mean that we can follow the fundamentals or principles, what guiding principle of SDGs when we are formulating programs and projects. So in that context, even look at this landscape management, that the programs and projects we talk here can be formulated by following these fundamental principles. Already this has been highlighted, like the importance of the stakeholder engagement, mobilizing the resources, the need assessment, and so those are the key steps basically. So I would highlight there basically that the capacity building become very important thing, as well as the policy coherence, because now we have many different policies across different sectors, and it's very important to look at these policies when you are localizing it. So therefore, agriculture, forestry, and tourism, there are certain priorities and policies. So in the localization process, the frameworks are already set. That the approaches are there, tools are there to look at these policies, and then make those actions or the programs or projects for the need of the country and the society. So therefore, in brief, basically the Sustainable Development Agenda and 17 SDGs will not only indicate the key elements, but also it's a process which highlight the importance of localization. So therefore, it's already there, but only thing, unfortunately, I don't see that type of thing happening. Especially, we have to map the particular program or project, especially in the case of landscape management, to show how this integrated to, or how this connected to the SDGs. So of course, SDGs should be localized one, our one, that targets and so on. So that's the process we have to take. Where the key words basically highlight that the stakeholder engagement is the key, policy coherence is a key, so we have to analyze those, and the integrated approach in the planning. And that's also highlighted earlier by Mr. Harpreet Singh also, we should not have a plan only targeting a particular area. So it should be targeted for the broader context. Our objectives or the even the aims and objectives of the project or program in the landscape management should cater for this all the broader context rather than only just one project. With that, I will conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sugutapal, highlighting a few key aspects. Capacity building is one, I think, how to use SDGs, and also policy coherence, which we need to take into account, so there would not be any conflict when things start to get implementation. Dr. Sampath Wahal, on accreditation, what steps do you consider as needed to be enhance the integration of standardization and accreditation into landscape management? Probably we could pay a more focus on areas like agriculture, tourism, how the accreditation comes into play in these areas.
Yes, thank you very much. Regarding the accreditations, as I previously mentioned, that the standardized approaches are there. So with that, into the standardized approaches, what we can do is we can some of approaches we can directly customize to our context. So regarding the agriculture sectors, at the moment we are working with now with the Ministry of Trade, Export Development, because there's a need on there's a demand on sustainable agricultural practices. At the end, you can have a product that we can label with, okay, fine, these coming through from the farm to fork. So approach, if you look at the entire supply chain, so people are looking for some kind of a healthy and environment friendly product. So that is something linked with the agricultural sector. At the moment we are working with developing some of the accredited processes to come up to make sure some of the products are safe and sustainable. And also we are engaging with the Ministry of Environment also to develop a national eco-labeling framework. So already been started the process to come up with that the eco-label is a front end for the customers. So the behind the process there are a lot of things now. If we have a very good clear eco-labeling process, so which is not leading to greenwashing on the certain context, that with that intention, Ministry of Environment initiated the eco-labeling, and we as a National Accreditation Authority, we are advocating them to come up with the accredited. With that accreditation, what we expect is to make sure transparent and efficient the competence and globally recognized approach on that. So, and also regarding the tourism sector also, at the moment actually we in accreditation board we have planned out some of the areas that we need to discuss, and we are working with the health sectors and all with the education sector also, and the tourism sector is one of the key area according to Vistas of Prosper. Also we have some of the areas that we identified, because as very clearly mentioned, that directly linked with the landscape planning, and also if you look at the quality of the service in terms of sustainability of delivery of the tourism product. So there are a lot of areas, the emerging areas there. For example, at the moment we are talking about the climate. So climate is very well understood by all the people, and people are looking for some kind of a institution with the climate friendly approaches. In Sri Lanka, as accreditation board, we have actually adapt some of the international standards like greenhouse gas management scheme. So now we are working on that, and already we have accredited 2 entities as certification bodies in Sri Lanka, which they can do a comprehensive greenhouse gas management certification and even go for the carbon neutral level certification. So we have seen that the industry, the interest on the tourism sector to go for a zero carbon entity, zero carbon operation. So these are some of the areas that we are working on. And also Global Sustainable Tourism Council, they have come up with a very stringent mechanism to certify some of the entities in terms of sustainability. So with that, as National Accreditation Authority, we can be partnered with them to have a locally recognized, to give some kind of a support to locally local certification bodies to get the accreditation through Sri Lanka Accreditation Board, then they can go with the relevant entities to give the certification with the international recognition, because which saves a lot of money sending out from Sri Lanka to other parties. At the moment, actually, we are working with the different entities, global entities, especially related to the climate action. So now some of the standards are there. So we have partnered through the International Accreditation Forum with these those type of scheme, what we technically call the scheme owners, to manage greenhouse gas. So, and through accreditation board, we have given the accreditation to local certification bodies, which saves again a lot of money on that aspect. So these are some of the areas. And also regarding the natural landscape management, if you look at the landscape management, so man-made processes are there, like cities, and so there's a trend on making sustainable cities. That's why in this ISO mapping on SDGs, there are more than 2,000 standards being developed on sustainable cities. So those are some of the frameworks which is very clearly, directly we can use these frameworks in planning cities, or in the operationalizing some of the activities in the development of the regional planning, even the national level planning. So that's why I have mentioned previously, these standards being taken a lot of effort, technical expertise, and it's ready made with the document very clearly. What we can do is we can adapt those things very easily. So that is one of the area. So as accreditation board, what we can do is and would like to invite all the institutions in Sri Lanka. Actually, at the moment we have already mapped more than 42 institutions, regulatory authorities, where we have seen there are a lot of areas we can utilize standardized approaches to make sure the implementation through accreditation in a lot of areas. So we are working with them, having dialogues, and also we would like to invite again to join with us. And also, if you have any areas of interest, then what we can do is we can map and we can identify, even we can provide some of the training on that areas, and we can advocate on other areas if you think of having regulations on that area. So as accreditation board, we are not a regulatory authority, but we can ask regulatory authorities to, if they need some of the regulations in place with the set developed framework. So it's very easy for us to drive some of the standardized approaches in a very transparent and competent and efficient way in the system. One suggestion, for example, it's a very now ISO 9001 is the most famous standard in the world. That is a system certification, management system certification. And 9001 covers actually most of the organizations, manufacturing and service sector, the organization that they are utilizing this 9001 standard. Now, as these type of, even the planning, the landscape planning is a process. Even these type of processes, with some of the workflows, we can utilize those type of framework to have very clear and more sustainable approaches with the lot of people's engagement. Now we have seen that the lot of other part of the world, people are using these type of standardized approaches to streamline and make sure the implementation of these planning processes in line with international recognition, because that is not to get the international attraction, but at least to have a kind of a developed system. With these systems, we can continue and continually improve some of the processes in the global, in the national level. So if you talk, this is something out of the context. Even we have developed the standards are there to the anti-bribery. Even there are some standard directly linked with, for example, ISO 22000 family. There's a standard called a local community slide disaster management framework. So now we see, by looking at those type of things, even there are some standards frameworks developed to transport, accident management system. So some of the countries, they utilize those type of things. So with that, I would there are a lot of areas, and even if you look at the natural landscape management system, now we at the moment we are working with the Ministry of Wildlife and the Forest Conservation to come up with national mechanisms to develop the climate finance approaches to give the community the benefit to the direct benefit to the community. And also there are developed approaches are like they are like conservation biodiversity conservation credits, well established mechanisms outside the country in some of the part of the world. So we are working towards getting these innovative systems into the country, and through accreditation we can make sure the implementation is more efficient and more sustainable. So
thank you very much, Dr. Wahala, for that explanation how the standardization and accreditation process can go forward with the landscape management process. I would get to Vasita Vijayanayaka, Executive Director of SLIC and Trust. I think the whole discussion opened up processes and opportunities for an organization like SLIC and Trust, which is based on bringing in evidence from the ground level to policy decision making, and also international processes into local level. So how would SLIC and Trust move forward in this regard? Yeah.
Thank you, Damita, and all the speakers. So as I mentioned, there are a few priorities which we have mapped for the next few years based on the work that was discussed here, plus what we've been doing. So some of them would be about ecosystem and biodiversity conservation, resilience and climate action, food systems and agriculture. So it's like an overall cycle that we're looking at it, not in isolation, and oceans, which includes coastal and marine conservation as well. And in line with these, we have priorities on just transition, where we're looking at communities, resource utilization, and transitioning into a climate resilient process across national and local levels. And also tourism sector is also a cross-cutting one, which relates to gender as well as stakeholder engagement. So what we're looking at is formalizing the processes, how we engage, because looking at things in a way that is a project-based one is a one-off. So we are looking at how what we do through a project can connect to a broader perspective. So even if we do not have a project or financial support, that we can engage with entities, but it feeds into a process that they can carry forward. So for example, what we are doing on risk management and risk transfer, we are looking at the agriculture sector as a priority in the project, but we are looking at how it can be included in other sectors. So it feeds into the landscape management components, forestry and biodiversity, and also tourism sector, SMEs, entrepreneurship, where resilience of the communities plus the entrepreneurs could be enhanced. So that's something we're looking at as well. And also how conservation could be an inclusive process, not necessarily looking at only biodiversity and ecosystems, but also humans and how they build on their livelihoods in a sustainable way. So in the work that we're doing or planning to do with ESCAMP, it would be a priority for us, how home gardening could be supported, other avenues of livelihoods being identified. It could be small-scale tourism sector activities, trainings that empower them to engage better, and also get information, access to information and capacity building. So some of those are there, and also identifying clear climate and disaster risks. I think this is there, but how it gets integrated into processes, and also how communities and different stakeholders are aware of this to integrate. So one gap is we do not have a lot of recent risk maps that are there for climate risk. And there's also technical expertise that's seen as a need. And Mr. Satwar Singh also highlighted, even in landscape management, how there was a lack of or inability to find the experts, that there might be expertise, how this is reached out and engaged, or them knowing that this need is there. So we're looking at how all these actors could be brought together in a way that we can engage and facilitate everyone's needs, where we possibly could work with them. And one more thing I forgot to mention is, while we're working in national context in Sri Lanka, we also work at regional and international level, and also in national levels in other areas like Asia and Africa. So we are doing climate risk maps, or profiles rather than maps, profiles for different countries on adaptation needs. So we are looking at how the work that we do at pilot level could be replicated at different levels, and these could be built to scale up activities across the world as a good example. So the avenues that we have through different platforms we work in, how these could be promoted and be adopted by different actors, not for us to go and implement them, but other people to apply these as examples from Sri Lanka as success stories in other countries. Because there has been a great interest in most of the work related to landscape, biodiversity, ecosystems, and given the entry points that are there for the next decade, for example, the ecosystem decade, the oceans decade that's coming up, the changes across biodiversity, UN frameworks, post-2020 framework. So these are good opportunities for us to see how just transition, tourism sector, livelihoods, and other key things that we focused on now could be integrated into planning processes at national level and also feed as examples to the global levels for people to adapt. So we are looking at how we can facilitate or support this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wasita. I would like to thank all the panelists to, we were able to complete the question round on time. So next we would move on to the questions from the audience. We have a large group of audience joining online with us. So I would like to direct any questions from the audience to the panelists. Yeah. Yeah, so we have a series of questions. First question is from Alexis Koblin to Mr. Satoru Singh. What was the stakeholder consultation process during the landscape planning?
Yeah, thank you, Alexis. It's a good question, I think. Here, of course, during the first planning, it was, I should say, it was not that much. This is something we learned from doing. And, but of course, there was so we had engaged a social development expert in this procedure as a one of the consultants. So he conducted a stakeholder analysis, stakeholder mapping and stakeholder analysis process. So with that, we came up with different type of stakeholders acting in different roles in this particular landscape. But of course, it's rather a difficult process because looking at the the heterogeneity of the landscape as well as the different actors. So it was, so we hired a social development expert and he conducted this stakeholder mapping process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Satoru Singh. I think there was another question from the same person to the whole panel. What are the legal basis for landscape planning management in Sri Lanka? I would like to understand if landscape approach is institutionalized or if there is any plan to do so.
At the time being, it's not institutionalized yet, but it is even the challenge ahead of us these days. So that is why now we are trying to work with the Sustainable Development Secretariat as well as the Finance Ministry, because we know, like in Sri Lanka, we produce lots of plans and they are just kept. Nothing happens beyond that. So this is why now we are trying hard to get this institutionalized at the national level, and we are working with the Sustainable Development Secretariat to get this institutionalized, as well as the first step would be the submission of the cabinet paper through the minister. And another good thing to be mentioned is now the president has appointed a Green Development Council or the task force, which includes lots of cabinet ministers as well as heads of different departments looking at the green development. So I think it's an ideal opportunity for us to get this submitted to this green development task force, because I think almost the objectives are the same. Thank you.
Anyone else like to if Dr. Punyavardhan is listening, how does this agriculture, like, because agriculture is everywhere in Sri Lanka and relates to about 60-70% of the livelihood production, like institutionalization of the landscape management planning process, how does it help the agriculture sector, Dr. Punyavardhan?
Yeah, but I will first spice up what Mr. Sadal Singh said, because though there are no mandated agency for institutionalization of landscape management in urban areas, urban development authority play a pivotal role in landscape management, because they have to approve the plan, they have to view the plan, and then they inspect, and they have to approve the plan. So we can't do our own without getting the approval of how the land is going to be managed. But it is limited to major municipal areas and other Colombo municipality. But in rural area, such kind of approach is not there. But to a certain extent, local authorities, they may not use the word of landscape managing, but they do also adapt a kind of very small scale landscape management in authorizing the development activities. And with respect to your second question about the agriculture, actually, we have another department called Land Use Policy Planning Division department under the Ministry of Lands, I think, under the Ministry of Land. And they have a kind of land use planning, so that simultaneously address the issue of landscape management. But in agriculture, when it comes to agriculture, even though we have recommended some areas for these crops, blah, 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 but it is not yet fully practiced. But since we always talk about the threat of climate change, we have to find the appropriate landscape or lands that are particularly suitable for different crops, if you want to increase the resilience of the agriculture sector to climate change.
Thank you, Dr. Punyavardhan, for that clarification. The next question also goes in similar lines from Jnanaharan Sarana Pavanathan. Like, is there any regulations or law to indicate the percentage of buildable area or land area there will be the greenery or landscape of development? Anyone else would like to come in this? Yeah.
In the master plan, we limit the buildable area to 30% of the land leased out. So that's the policy we are implementing. So if you are given out 7 acres, out of that only 30% for building.
Coming back to the same question, does it apply to a larger area, like if you develop a, say, Kalpitiya open area, that sort of a thing? Does it come in
Any of our properties developed under SLTD owned resorts, the development right now is limited to only 30% of whatever the leased out total area. So if somebody wants to build 3 acres, he will have to work backwards and see how many acres he needs to lease out from us. So we leave the rest of it for greenery and to maintain the, so again within that he can work around, and again there are certain limitations given from the master plan on what needs to be, there are the reservation lines and all those things will have to be maintained.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything that Dr. Wahala in terms of, yeah, Dr. Sukutapal, yes.
Just to add to that, I think UDA, they have some regulatory guidance, but they are targeting basically the urban areas. So still there's a lack of such a comprehensive approaches. But usually when you have these approval processes, all these key agencies are part of the approval. For example, when you look at SCA, Sustainability Authority, we have a project approval committee. All the key agencies relevant to that area, even local authorities, are part of the approval process. So they take into their consideration into the approval process. It's a very stringent and take a lot of time. As you said, it's become a barrier for some time for development projects. But in a way that cater for the need for the environment and the society. So that's a positive point. But then it's not laid down as a regulatory framework. That's the missing element, I think. In that context, you are aware probably that there's a present intervention on developing an updated National Environment Action Plan. There, one of the key intervention identified is this gap. So to come up with a central body to have this land use plan by looking at what you call misuse, social use, and so on. So I think that proposal has come up through the Enhancement Action Plan. One is approved by the cabinet. I think this will become a kind of a maybe regulatory framework. So that's for the future. But at least having that action within the within the National Environment Action Plan indicate that the policymakers has already they have already identified the gap. So I think in the future, I think this will come in, and especially with the Sustainable Development Goal, their localization also, this aspect is being discussed. I think so. Thank you.
The important thing is for all the agencies to work collectively on that. For example, now we limit the buildable area and also we limit the height, especially when it comes to the coastal areas. So we limit it up to 16 meters for tourism projects, but unfortunately somebody can go and build it under apartment law and go high. So we don't have a control over that. And then they build up apartments and then they start selling those apartments as tourism products through online marketing channels. So that is why I think collectively we need to, because it's important that we protect the view of the coastal areas. So as I said, these things needs to be discussed and agreed at the highest level, and then we implement it collectively.
I think that interlinks with what Dr. Sugutapal said about the policy coherence, having two different policies for two different and contradicting. So there's another question from Dilip, an Assistant Director of Disaster Management Center. I think I lost the question. Yeah, I want to know that nowadays most of the companies, individuals are sand mining. Who is responsible body? Because the CEA and GSMB are working different path. There is no integrated link with relevant organizations. I wonder who could answer these questions. I think we don't have the relevant. Yeah.
When it comes to the coastal areas, it is the responsibility of the CCD. I don't know whether he's referring to that or in other rivers and other areas. But if it is from the coastal belt, it is CCD which is responsible for that.
So, like coastal areas is CCD, but whether, like as you mentioned, the other, we don't have an expert here to answer them.
Because it's the CEA and the GSMB. Those are the responsible agencies.
Do we have any other questions from the? Dr. Punawardena, you have anything to add on to this?
That's why I was telling, to some extent, divisional secretary is also responsible for issuing permit on sand mining.
Pahala, what are the standard certification schemes relevant applied to sectors related to landscape approach in Sri Lanka? Forestry, agriculture, and I think you touched upon a bit on that as well.
Yes, adding it actually, so I cannot come up with a long list of the standards directly linked with the forestry, whatever. However, if you look at the landscape architecture or the landscape planning context, so as I mentioned previously, if you think of natural landscape and conservation of forest, so there are certain standards are there. Especially on not directly the conservation of forest or whatever, but it's mainly linked with the organizations, operations. If they are utilizing the land use, some standards are there. For example, now this is actually not an ISO standard. Rainforest Alliance, those type of standards, approaches that they are to manage to certain level to balance the use of natural resources, the natural forest area, and the agricultural area. So for other use of natural resources. So likewise, we can find, now I have mentioned at the end the last discussion, some of the financial concepts like biodiversity, conservation credit, conservation easementship approaches, biobanking. So those are some of the standardized approaches, and go towards even with the accredited level. So that is the highest level of certification and verification process on some of the standards. So there are certain standards are there, people are utilizing on that. So I cannot come up with a list of direct standards. However, if you look at the forest management, there are certain standards, even the local standards also there. If you are thinking of sustainable biomass, there's a standard from developed by SLSI. So likewise, these are actually the international standards adapted to Sri Lankan context. Likewise, there are different areas that we can address. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Wahala, for addressing that question. I think education and awareness creation is a critical part on that, for people to know what's available and how to use those. Again, from Alexis Coblin, what is the government position towards landscape approach management? Is this the way forward? Who should take the lead? Again, towards the ministry and Mr. Sathur Singh.
So actually at the moment I think it's like sort of a combination of ministries, not only the Ministry of Wildlife and the Forest Conservation, because there should be a number of responsible ministries as well as it's sort of a, even at the ministry level, it's sort of a it's not a single approach. I think we should be sort of a type of committee. So that is why even I mentioned this green investment, what you call the task force, I think, which gives us a good opportunity to look at this issue and try to implement it through this, because it includes, as I mentioned earlier, it includes a number of relevant cabinet ministers, state ministers, as well as secretaries and different heads of the institutions. So if this type of plan to be activated, I think this is the best opportunity, or else we were looking at the sustainable development secretariat. So those are the two options available at the moment, but since this sort of concept is new to Sri Lankan context, I think we have to explore the other possibilities also, but at the moment we are looking at these two options. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sathur Singh. Yeah, I think we are into the last 5 minutes, so probably maybe 1 or 2 questions is what we can take. From Tilal Nanayakara to Dr. Wahala. Dr. Wahala mentioned that the standards that SLSI and other government agencies have are voluntary standards. At ground level, is it possible to implement such standards if they are voluntary? If not, is there a move within the government to make this mandatory or incentivized?
Okay, so I can make a clarification on that. SLSI, Sri Lanka Standard Institution, is a national standard body. So some of the standard SLS standards are mandatory requirements to be. For example, if we can see this bottled water, those type of, there are certain SLS standard. These are the regularized and the mandatory. So I was mentioning that some of the international standard, ISO standards, so most of them are not regulated. So for example, if you take we are working with standard on 15,189, so that is for medical laboratory standard for implementing quality management system for medical laboratories. So that is not an mandatory standard to implement in Sri Lankan context. Actually, we are working with the authorities at least to come up with some kind of mechanism, phase level implementation mechanisms to transform existing medical laboratory practices to that standardized approach. Because if it is a voluntary, only the commitment to engage with that type of approach is very limited. So therefore I agree that so we have to work at least to incentivize implementing these type of standard. So again, yes, as accreditation board, that's why actually we have initiated and we have partnered with the SLICAN Trust, because as accreditation board, according to our the act, and also as we are partnering with International Accreditation Forum, we have to be independent on that. So because we cannot regulate and we cannot give the accreditation, therefore the regulatory authorities should understand that, and that's why we are creating some of the awareness about some of the areas where the regulator can regulate that. Then we can come into the picture to do the accreditation as a third party independent body.
Thank you, Dr. Wahala. I think Professor Anoja has something to add on this.
Thank you. I wish to draw your attention to one small point. I certainly understand that national policies are in an overarching position in regard to landscape development in Sri Lanka. At the same time, we are losing a wealth of resources scattered in the country. That is something to do with community-based organizations and non-governmental organizations, because our focus is on the local processes as well. So I think these scattered interventions made possible by or through some of the state agencies like upper watershed management in Akkarsia. Very recently I have seen that areas being visited by the president of this country. That's not a reason for me to discuss this. But the thing is, what are the transformations made by or through local agencies, community-based organization in restoring a lost landscape, gradient from natural forest to non-forest lands, including home gardens. At the same time, I wish to mention something else also. In buffer zone development project initiated or supported by Darwin Initiative, which has initiated a lot of work on landscape restoration. Likewise, there are so many examples. I think those are the sort of wealth that we should not be lost in air. Therefore, some space should be given to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Anoja, for that highlighting that importance. I would like to get to Vasita on that, like, you know, being organization which brings in ground level evidence to national and international processes, and also, yeah, anything that you need to add on that process. Yeah.
I wanted to actually quickly add on some of the work we've been doing last week, Damita, on localizing national contributions, climate contributions, and engaging the provincial level stakeholders to take these actions to implementation as well as capacity building. So we do identify that it's very important to engage provincial level, district level, divisional level actors, not necessarily just government actors, but also multiple stakeholders, including private sector, academia, as well as youth organizations. So some of these activities are done, I mean, most of them are done with the partnership of the government actors as well. So the provincial level work we've been doing the last 2-3 weeks, engaging the different stakeholders, has been with the Climate Change Secretariat and the Ministry of Environment support. And the work that we do on conservation, it's in partnership with MIPA. And the work that we're trying to do in the future is also with partnerships with ESCAMP, SLAB, and other ministries and stakeholders who would be able to carry forward the work that's being done. So what we are trying to do is to engage the stakeholders at the ground level to effectively engage in a way that is coordinated, so that the information flow is there, capacity building is also shared amongst different actors, and for us to play a technical supporting role than to lead the process as such, because our role would be to support a process that's ongoing at the country level or even international level, but not to play the person to implement it as such. So we are playing a supporting role in bringing the evidence from the ground, as well as engaging youth. For example, our Global Youth Forum that happens annually, that has about 70 countries participating, and we want to scale it up to a level that at local level the youth can implement actions with different policymakers, private sector engaged. Some of the private sector is already engaging with us in supporting these actions, for example, conservation actions. So what we are looking at is documenting these, publishing material that can be shared, and also having long-term capacity building processes to engage local actors, to engage at the national as well as international level. So I think it needs to be mentioned that it's a multi-stakeholder driven process, multi-actor driven process, and we all have our roles to play. And engaging and coordinating better could go a long way by complementing what's happening than duplicating the same action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wasita. So then there's a question from Nishamani. What are the possibilities available for agriculture faculties to join with landscape conservation project in terms of field research and other contributions? Wondering how we can contribute to this, as this would be a great opportunity to serve. I would first go to Mr. Sataru Singh and also Dr. Punyavardhana in the next.
At the moment, Nishamani, I think it's too late. Like I shouldn't say too late, but of course this particular plan has been completed, but I don't think it's going to be a sort of a solid plan, sort of a live plan. So and also the activities now during the dry zone plan, or what we refer as HKK now. The recommendations are in the status of recommendations are being translated to the actions. So there are, I think, still there is an opportunity for us to share all this information with us. If you can kindly pass your email address to us, so I think we can even have a discussion later. So this, I think it's a very good idea and a very good proposal for us to engage with other, especially the experts from faculties of agriculture and all. And the second, so we'll share this with you and see how we can incorporate the views and the inputs from the faculties of agriculture. Thank you.
Dr. Punyavardhana, do you have to add anything to this or suggest anything?
Especially the two agriculture faculties, one University of Peradeniya agriculture faculty and the other one is the Vayamba University. They have different courses actually on under the horticulture stream, horticulture and landscape architecture. One course offered by the University of Peradeniya Faculty of Agriculture, and also there's another MSc program at the Postgraduate Institute of Agriculture focusing on the landscape management at MSc level. So in this postgraduate level study program, definitely they will have to undertake a project. Therefore, there should be that kind of conservation project under the university. And without your permission, Damita, I will answer for the next question as well, because it is directly related to me. As a local NGO in the district of Anuradhapura, we are very much keen in working partners to support the process. I need to highlight the question based on agriculture. Do you have taken into consideration the sustainable agricultural practices for agriculture? Use of Glycidia mulching control balance for soil erosion in highlands organic fertilizer. The answer for this question is yes. We are very much emphasized and focused on the good GAP. You might have heard these three letters very often, GAP, good agricultural practices, where we always focus on the adapting non-environmental pollution and non-degradable approaches while working in the agriculture, from the seeding up to harvesting, even up to the from the farm gate to the up to the market. So every point, every node at the agriculture supply chain, we will adapt GAP, and it is going to be certified, and that right now the certification authority is the Department of Agriculture. I think in future they might join hand with the accreditation board, and it is at the infantry stage right now, but now the entire program of the Department of Agriculture is focused on the SL GAP, Sri Lanka Good Agricultural Practices. And the second question is the use of Glycidia mulching control balance for soil erosion in highlands. Yes, this has been practiced I think more than 40 years. We call the SALT system, sloping land agriculture land, sloping agriculture land technology. There we advise to have Glycidia, that means DADAP rows over the contour lines in a single row or double row, depending on the slope of the land. If the slope is above the 10% of the land, then we address them to use this soil technology, that is the establishing Grisevia trees as a double row along the contour line, which will act as a soil conservation bonds. And from time to time, when it is growing, they will lock the branches and make it as a fertilizer or composting material. So I think I answered for both questions.
Damita, I just want to add to the what I told answered about the question number 1, because I forgot to mention that we had 2 eminent professors from the Faculty of Agriculture, University of Peradeniya, in our team who worked for this dry zone HKK landscape. So I forgot to mention that too.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sathurusinghe. So I think we are now at the end of our session. Thank you very much for all the panelists. Thank you, Ms. Samanthi Ranasinghe from Ministry of Wildlife and Forest Conservation, Mr. Andra Sathurusinghe from the ESCAMP project, Dr. Ranjit Punyawardena joining us online. Professor Anoja Vikramasinghe again joined online with us. Dr. Prasad Jayasuriya from the Sri Lanka Tourism. Dr. Tusita Sugatapala from the Sri Lanka Dr. Sampath Wahala from the Sri Lanka Accreditation Board, Ms. Osita Vijayanayaka from SLIC and Trust. I would like to thank all the panelists for attending this very fruitful discussion. On behalf of SLIC and Trust, of course, and Ministry of Wildlife and Tourism for giving this opportunity and engaging with us to conduct this important awareness creation session, and all the participants who joined us online and created a very fruitful discussion. I think this is the starting point to go forward, how to take the ESCAMP project and the landscape management process and the concept more into the mainstreaming into the planning process of Sri Lanka. So as Bosita suggested, that taking it to the ground level, local level, and bringing back and forth the ground level evidence, engaging multiple actors. Sri Lanka Tourism informed that they are interested in developing plans, and Sri Lanka Accreditation Board like that. So this would create a starting point, a journey where we could build a more sustainable country, and probably we could portray how Sri Lanka can be a green destination, in terms of all our aspects: sustainable, facing the climate change effects of climate change, more resilient. Our communities will be more resilient. So let's make this a starting process for a long journey. And I would like to again thank everyone who was involved in organizing this overall process in terms of logistics and everything as well. So let's keep in touch. Some of the questions, we had a lot of questions which we could not answer. So we will try to actually redirect the questions to the panelists, and maybe probably get back to you over your emails. Yeah. Thank you very much.